think it's good timing to do a little audio on our friend Eddie Lampert, CEO of Sears, or I don't know what they call it these days, Sears Holdings Group or what have you. Now, I haven't followed Sears. In fact, I've never followed Sears. Why? Well, I don't follow losers. I knew enough about Sears to know that it was a loser many years ago. And as Sears approaches bankruptcy, there's rumors out there. It's October 12th, 2018. There's rumors next week, the following week. Of course, I came out and officially recommended shorting Sears stock in 2012 in the special video series I made. But even before then, I knew the company would eventually go bankrupt. I knew it had no chance whatsoever. And I wrote an article. I remember when I wrote that article, it was 2005, 2006, something like that. A couple of years after Kmart and Sears had merged. And I knew the fate because it was just so obvious. They were just trying to take a dinosaur, an aged dinosaur that was completely out of touch with contemporary retail, and they were trying to merge, as I termed, two losers, right? You don't create a success by merging two losers and trying to cut costs. That's a gimmick. That's a short-term gimmick. And as you can see by the performance of Sears, that's exactly what happened. In the early stages, it did very well. But you look at the long-term chart, and it did very, very poorly. Now, I'm sure when Sears finally files for bankruptcy, and even more so a few years afterward, the aftermath of this, you'll see write-ups about Lampert. There'll be more investigations, and there'll be more conclusions as to how he's going to profit. No matter how you would like to look at this, the fact is that this is a huge disaster for Lampert. And I'll get back to that here later, but that's not to say that he's not going to profit, because he will. In short, Eddie Lampert's tenure as the CEO of Sears, which of course was only because his fund took a majority stakehold in, equity and debt, it was clear to me, and of course I made this prediction on video, the bankruptcy prediction, and I guaranteed it in May 2012. This was before Lampert became CEO. I didn't change my mind. Didn't matter. Didn't matter who you brought in unless there was someone transformational already in a transformational type of industry and business. But of course, it's pretty easy to predict the plot when you know a company is going to go bankrupt eventually, and then you have a hedge fund manager who's a large shareholder. You make that person the CEO, and what do you think you're going to get? Right? There's no major transformation going on. And as I predicted, he chopped off assets, he restructured assets, sold off assets. Why? Well, to protect his piggy bank, you understand. And when this is all said and done, I'm sure Lampert's going to make some money out of this. I'm sure he's restructured much of the assets, certainly the debt. He's probably going to get close to 100 pennies on the dollar, maybe 100 pennies on the dollar completely. Depends upon, you're dealing with a hedge fund guy who works with legal parasites, you understand. And you're dealing with a board of directors that's a bunch of puppets. basically appointed by him. Completely no governance whatsoever. This is why Lampert has been permitted to do what he's done over the years, which has been complete sabotage for his own benefit. And I'm shocked that there's been no shareholder lawsuits. He's going to win, but he's not going to win big. I can guarantee you that. He's going to win just for surviving the disaster that he created with his own ego. His ego got in the way. Because, of course, Lampert, like all these financial parasites, they're always telling us, the media, how brilliant they are. And all their buddies who have benefited from them, they're there to pat their back too. It's a cult, right? It's a gang, it's a network, it's a mafia. Oh, he's genius. He's brilliant. He's the next Warren Buffett. Of course, that's what they were saying about him back in 2003, 2004, after he merged his Kmart, which he pulled out of bankruptcy, which was a stupid move. I don't care what anyone says, but a dumb move. I mean, are you an investor? What are you? Are you an investor, or you want to play fucking games, Lampert? And so after he basically was just cutting the expenditures to boost earnings, which of course stifles long-term growth. But there is no long-term growth when you merge two pieces of garbage. When you do that, it looks pretty good. Everyone's saying he's the next Warren Buffett. Now, I don't know the numbers, of course, but because this data is not public, but I believe his fund topped out maybe around, I don't know, 15 years ago or so, at about $15 billion. And like all these guys, you know, they get one or two nice calls, and then they blow up. But it doesn't seem that drastic because they have the help from their friends. In other words, they get one or two good investments, and then they got their parasitic mafioso buddies raising more money for them. That's what happens, folks. You got Goldman Sachs, which they did a fundraising for him for over $3 billion. And I'm sure he had other Wall Street firms and advisory groups raise funds from. Where do you think this money comes from, folks? It comes from institutional investors. Does it come from wealthy individuals? Yeah, some of it. He had his other gang of pieces of garbage who have made their money through fraud. Michael Dell, right? Michael Dell. I'm not going to get into the Michael Dell story, but anybody who remembers Dell, how Dell completely refused to honor their warranties, which is why most people bought a Dell, right? That's fraud. But of course, you know, you had other guys. Soros was involved as an investor. Many other and of course he got his start many years ago as a kid. And that's how all these guys, I mean, how do you think they get their start? Back in the 80s, late 80s, 88, 89, when Lampert was just a kid, out of college a few years. Of course, being a, you know, you got the connection, right? You get into the Ivy League schools like he did, and he meets the buddies at his school at Columbia. He becomes, I think he was a roommate of Steve Mnuchin, our resident Treasury Secretary from Hollywood. Many other scumbags he met. You could just look into that. Folks, I'm telling you how it all works. Okay? That's how it works. You go to these schools, and you got to be because the want to stick with their own kind. If you're not part of them, they don't want you around. Now, I'm not going to get into all this, but I know I went to a fucking Ivy League school. I don't make any connections. I'm not. You understand? It's a fucking boys club. It's a mafia club. Lampert gets out of school. Well, before he gets out of school, actually, he gets an internship to Goldman Sachs, of course, because Steve Mnuchin's dad works over there. Of course, Mnuchin worked over there too, which is pretty funny. As I mentioned in another audio, if you look into Mnuchin, he was, he's a former Wall Street guy. He worked at Goldman Sachs, the swamp that's supposed to be drained. But the reality is, if you look at Mnuchin, over the past 15 or 20 years, he's been a Hollywood director and producer. That's what he's been doing all these fucking years. Up until, I think he had movies released in 2017. So, this is our Treasury Secretary. He doesn't know what the hell he's doing. He hasn't worked on Wall Street in 20 years or so. The hell? Whoa. He doesn't know what the fuck's going on. And even if he had been working there recently, why is he not there now, right? Why did he go to Hollywood, folks? Remember what I told you? When you fail on Wall Street and then you're, what do? You go into the media, usually the financial media. You understand? Think about that career change. Why? Right? Because the guy's obviously a moron. My point is that Richard Rainwater, who's also I don't know if he's still alive, and he was, of course, connected with the Bass family, the Fort Worth, Texas Bass family. He ran their money, billionaires, which, by the way, there's no connection, I don't think. There's no connection at all with the Bass billionaires and Kyle Bass, even though actually I believe Kyle Bass's family, I believe, is from Fort Worth, but there's no connection. But anyway, Richard Rainwater gave, or I guess to invest, Lampert close to $30 million, $28 million back in the late 80s to start a hedge fund when the guy was a fucking kid, 24, 25 years old. Doesn't know jack shit. Okay, think about that. $28 million back then was, I don't know, what do you think? $100 million maybe? Depends upon how you want to adjust for, if you want to adjust it for inflation or adjust it for modest gains in the stock market, whatever. But $28 million back in 1988 for a hedge fund, that was pretty fucking big. I can tell you right now. And of course, you didn't have to do a whole lot to do well back then. Especially considering that this fund was more of a longer-term investment fund. So think about the performance of the stock market from 88, right, through 2000, 2001, let's say 2000. I don't know off the top of my head, but I would say it was, 18% annually, something like that. Right, depending upon the market. Something around there. 17% maybe, I don't know. I can recall that the average mutual fund was around that return. So think about a hedge fund where you can use leverage. You can leverage those returns. And what was the longest bull market in U.S. history, right? Up until just a few months ago. And still, even though we're in the longest bull market in U.S. history right now, it's not the greatest bull market in U.S. history. The greatest bull market still in U.S. history was that of the late 80s, early 90s, up through the late 90s, through the dot-com, right? The implosion of the dot-com bubble. That was the greatest. So, just take a look at the NASDAQ annual returns in the 90s. Wow. So, was Lampert really a great investor, or did he get lucky on timing? My guess is probably, to be fair, probably half and half. Probably a little more timing was much more important. Let's say 3/4 and a quarter. Probably he's probably a pretty decent investor, but he's certainly not a great investor or brilliant. He's just not. I don't know anybody in the financial industry who's a genius. Like, the media is telling us all these guys are geniuses, right? Just like the media tells us all these perverts and pedophiles in Hollywood and in the arts, they're geniuses, right? Woody Allen, he's a genius, isn't he, huh? No, I'm sorry. The geniuses are the guys, the important guys in physics and chemistry. The guys that developed the laws of the universe. They uncovered, they figured out how things work. The guys responsible for amazing scientific discoveries that have led to astonishing innovations. Those guys are the geniuses of the world. My battery is probably going to run out here. Don't know if I'll continue, but getting back to Lampert. So you got this guy who gets the money from his cabal buddies and the opportunities, and his timing is great. And so by the time he needs to buy out Kmart, his shareholders would say, sure, fine, whatever you say, Mr. Genius. And you see what happens. $15 billion fund, down to $1 billion, billion and a half now. I don't know to what extent. It's probably mostly through redemptions. People have pulled out. But the point is, there's two main points I want to emphasize here. The first one is the power, the advantage offered to those in the right tribe. It's almost impossible for them to fail. Yet so many of them do. And some of you may not even understand, you may not realize or appreciate what I'm saying when I'm talking about, for instance, Lampert going to Goldman Sachs and say, hey, can you guys raise money for me? Okay, sure. Here's $3.5 billion we've got for you. I mean, you can take anybody in the world who's got access to capital like that, and I can guarantee you can take 10 of these so-called great fund managers out there, and that one random person's probably going to do better than at least 3 or 4 of them. What am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that most of this stuff is luck, even by the so-called great investors. What they have that separates them from others is they have access to this capital, folks, and they have insider information. The other point I wanted to make was that this portrayal, this whole story of Lampert and the Sears catastrophe really illustrates the complete perversion and disgust of capitalism, what capitalism has become. You're going to see Eddie Lampert make a good deal of money, ultimately, out of Sears. It's not going to be huge, I don't think. But it's going to be a bigger turnaround than people thought. They're thinking that he's losing so much money, right? He could have made a lot of money if he structured things and got the fuck out a long time ago. Okay. But he's ground it down all this time, whittled down the assets because he's been restructuring. I believe he's been restructuring things so that he doesn't lose money as a bondholder. And he's got all these other assets. And when Sears does file for bankruptcy, he'll control everything, and who knows what he'll do with the assets, including the real estate. Maybe he will relaunch it a different name, right? This is a complete theft. It's a theft of shareholder value. And let's think about the jobs that were lost over the 2 decades or so, 1.5 decades, when Lampert was involved. How many hundreds of thousands of jobs? 100, 200, 300,000? Look it up. Steve Mnuchin was on the board up until, I believe, getting into the White House as well for a long time. Our Treasury Secretary, he was involved in the collapse of Sears. You don't hear about that. Why not? Mr. Hollywood guy, a guy in Hollywood. What the fuck is he doing in Sears, right? On the board. Well, because he's Lampert's buddy, his college roommate. You see? He's got his puppets there. And you're going to see also the pension plan, which is a complete disaster of Sears, underfunded, majorly underfunded. When the bankruptcy occurs, you're going to see those workers lose their pensions or lose a good deal of it, depending upon how much the PBGC provides. But Lampert ain't going to lose money. He's going to keep his homes in Florida, Connecticut, Aspen, elsewhere, his enormous homes, his 300-foot yacht. And this is a guy, by the way, for all you libertarians, he's a libertarian type of guy. Freedom, individualism. These are the people who have destroyed capitalism, folks. They have perverted and destroyed capitalism. They're feeding you all type of nonsense and propaganda. They are for criminal activities. I'll get back to Lampert at some other point in the future. My battery's ready to die now. That's why I'm going to end this today. But hopefully I'll revisit this piece of garbage in the future.
So while we're on the topic of crypto, if you're looking for a place to buy, sell, track, or trade both crypto and NFTs all in one place with fees that are up to 85% lower than the top competitors, then FTX US is there to help. They're trusted by millions of users, and what I like the most about them is that they allow you to set up an automatic recurring buy so that you can dollar cost average into the markets on a regular basis. So if you're interested, the link is down below in the description with the code GRAHAM, and you could get all the way up to $100 for signing up depending on how much you trade.